get rid of the competition, and then privatize all of these industries. So let's think about where that puts us, because we've been saying, let's see, what can we erase here? This will be for later on in the semester, so let's erase this. We've been talking about people power, right, as you now know very well. And we've said that the old opposition used to be people power versus state power. And then Nagler comes along with his oddball ideas, and he says it's really a threefold thing, because you have to take into account the inherent power in the individual, which really is the base of the pyramid for all of these things. But now suddenly, it's not the people against the state anymore. In fact, very often the people are appealing to what's left of the government for protection against these rapacious corporate networks. And what's taking over the world in David Korten Volume 1 era is basically the entire world being made into a market where everything is commoditized. And let me just read you one example about that, and then I'm going to try and leave enough time for us to have a discussion, and I think this will work. But this is from Z Magazine for December of 2006. And there's an article called GM Foods and World Hunger. I'm just going to give you one highlight. This is his language now. The food dictators who control intellectual property and patent monopolies over GM seeds and plants. These people recently attempted through the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, taking over global institutions for their own purposes, and the World Health Organization, to use the famine in Zambia to market GM foods, genetically modified foods, through aid programs. Even though more than 45 African countries expressed a willingness to supply local, non-genetically modified relief and voiced support for Zambia's desire to not pollute its crops with GM food. So, I keep saying that this is a new old system. It's really a new take at a larger scale with better technology of a system that's been in place forever. And it really hasn't been always a classical system of the nation state, against other nations, the imperialists against victimized nations. It's a struggle between one ideology against another, and a set of people who gravitates towards the ideology of exploitation, ownership, and competition versus people who feel somehow that that ideology is wrong. It's not what human beings have to end up being. So just next time you're swimming at Speaker, you walk out to Bancroft, take a right, go past the bus stop there. I assume you'll still see it. There's an advertisement that's been there for a long time. It's an advertisement for condos in San Francisco, as if a Berkeley student could afford a condo in San Francisco. I don't know who this is supposed to be aimed at, this advertisement. But what it says is, buy the Bay. B-U-Y, not B-Y. B-U-Y, the Bay. In other words, this is training people to regard the world as an object, as a commodity, which they can buy and sell. Who owns the Bay that people should come along and buy it? I think we should have a wallet-sized version of Chief Seattle's speech, where he says, you cannot own the earth, and we should all carry it around in our wallet. Okay, so now, let me quickly turn to some of the ways that the resistance is getting itself together. If you think about Gandhi's main ideas, there are two of them which, if you were to implement those ideas, globalism from above would disappear immediately. And those two ideas are trusteeship and Swadeshi. You cannot buy and sell the Bay if you are its trustee, right? You want to make sure that it's still a habitat for certain kinds of ducks, and you want to get all of those car batteries out of it that people dumped in there for about 30 years. I have a friend who works on that in a nonprofit that just dredges car batteries out of the Bay, so the lead won't be poisoning the fish. And if you're a trustee instead of an owner, globalism simply will not be elaborate. That is the neoliberal top-down type of globalism. And then we'd be free to discover one another as one big family with unity and diversity and all the rest of it. The other idea, of course, is Swadeshi, which means localism, and that was reflected in Gerrymander and Ed Goldsmith's book, Against the Global Economy and For a Turn Toward the Local. If you do Swadeshi, there would be nobody to organize an exploitive system and take it across the top and exploit other people with it. Okay, so keep those ideas of decentralization, localism, and non-ownership. If we just had grasped, I've been told that I use the word grok too frequently, but I'm going to use it one more time. If we had just grokked those ideas, we would, the world population, whoever we're talking about here, you'd never have this global disaster that's coming up. So let me give you then one example of a way this is being fought from another article. It's a very non-local try I'm probably drinking here, but that's okay. This is from Peacework, subtitled Global Thought and Local Action for Nonviolent Social Change. And this, you'll find these in that shelf that I pointed out to you outside our office in Stevens. And this is an article called Globalization Co-op Style. So in other words, said, yeah, okay, let's have globalization, but let's do it with co-ops. And it turns out, well, let me read the opening paragraph. In the early 1900s, a long, long time ago, fishing and farming families throughout Atlantic Canada came together in study circles, often around their kitchen tables, to learn about their economy. Very, very local. I remember doing the free speech movement. I don't know who I'm talking about here, but people with beards or long ponytails, depending on whether you were a boy or a girl, we decided we didn't like the university as a big institution. Oh yeah, in fact, I want to say something about our university. I'll get back to that in a second. So we started something called the Free University. And we just met in various odd places. Coffee in those days was terrible, so we didn't often meet in coffee shops. There was no lattes or anything. It was a real deprivation. But we would meet in one place or another, and I remember trying to learn ancient Chinese from somebody who happened to know a little bit about that language. And that experiment lasted about 4 weeks, I think. Learning Chinese is not a very easy thing to do if you're not a native speaker of that language. And there was really nothing to sustain the concept of a university without walls. It was a beautiful idea, but there wasn't enough clarity and enough momentum behind it. So I want to now back up a second and add something to what I was saying about how states, governments, are now playing an extremely ambiguous role. They are, of course, they're much bigger than local communities, much bigger than individuals. So they have their dangers to begin with, but in a way, they're better than what we've got, what we're heading into getting right now. And if you want to think about how that works, just think of our own university. When I came here, I think something like 54% of the university's budget was provided by the state of California. And that meant there was fairly ample money to go around for experiments, not for nonviolence. Of course, let's not be ridiculous. But experiments in various things. Like, should we have a department of demographics? Let's try it. Hire 5 or 6 people, teach it for a while, see what happens. And most of these ideas were thought up by this odd group of middle people who don't really belong anywhere. They're called professors. They have no power, but at that point they still have a little bit of prestige. Now, I think, I may get the numbers slightly wrong, but last I heard it's something like 20% of the university's budget comes from the state government, which means 20% of the money is coming from the public. Where is the rest of the money going to come from? Enter Beyond Petroleum. You now come into a situation like this and you say, hey, we'll give you $500 million, which is really not a lot of money to them. But you know that old song, Been Down So Long, it looks like Up From Here, and the next verse is, a $10 bill looks like a window shade to me. It's like $500 million is more money than you ever dreamed of hearing about in your whole life, and everything is swept away. There's like one or two lone faculty voices saying maybe genetic modification isn't the way to go for getting new energy sources. And anyway, I have experienced myself in my own life what happens when you take power away from government and give it to corporations. Because basically governments are, even if they are despotic governments, are somewhat dependent on the will of the people. Corporations are the most efficient entities for money making, and they're completely insulated from the will of the people. They have but one responsibility, which is to bring in cash. Okay, so now that we're just about as depressed as we're going to get for the rest of the week, let's start building it back up. So here are these Canadians sitting at lots of good things starting in that country, sitting around their kitchen tables learning about their economy. What an idea. You know, they live off their economy every day, but it never dawned on them that they should have something to do with it. They should study how it works. And they used a curriculum which was developed by men and women who were connected with a university, St. Francis Xavier University in Ontegonish, Nova Scotia. So, okay, this did not come from Harvard, Oxford, Göttingen, or Cambridge. It came from a relatively out-of-the-way university and a relatively out-of-the-way place. So this curriculum explained to people how their wealth was being extracted by middlemen who lived elsewhere, who owned the means to turn the farming and fishing communities into, quote, value-added products, even as other middlemen were selling them their agricultural inputs, the foods, the fuel, and other consumer goods. So they're being literally sold a bill of goods at the highest prices possible, and they're being paid the lowest prices possible for their products. And if there's people doing this are smart, they'll keep these farmers and these fishing people barely alive, so they won't go into destitute. They don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. But this is how the system works. My son works with a farmer in Nicaragua who lives on the Pacific coast, one of those coasts. And the community is called Salinas Grande, which means the big salty. And one of the things that he does is he collects sea salt. Sea salt is, now you probably are not aware of this, I wasn't either, but sea salt is a very yuppified commodity now. You can buy it in Andronicos and Oliver's for like $8 for a little vial of it like this, and you convince yourself that you're having a more satisfying experience than somebody else is just taking, Morton's and dumping it on their hamburger. And so this stuff is selling like $8 or $10 for a little thing like that. And Pablo is getting $10 per kilo, for 100 kilos sack. So people are just, siphoning off that wealth all the way up and down the line. It's even worse with heroin, but I told Josh not to get involved in heroin trade. Anyway, what happens in this area is it started with an adult education effort. So please take note. Education is a very powerful tool if used correctly. And it led to the creation of hundreds of co-ops and credit unions across the region, which had what are called today economies of scale. In other words, the economy operates within the region to which it pertains. You're not really being owned and operated by mega institutions and mega corporations that are hundreds of miles away. Let me tell you the rest of this really quickly and see if we have time for discussion. I'm sorry that I went on and on today, but we'll make up for it. The main point that these people hold before themselves as their ideology is, in traditional economic thinking, each of the units competes. The minute there's a unit, the people in there close their eyes to the other units and say, how do we thrive? So if you weigh in on the side of the consumer says, I want to pay the lowest cost possible for my milk, or whatever else I'm buying. The producer says, I want to get as much money as I can, and they're in inevitable perpetual conflict. So their spokesman says, this does not reflect the cooperative values of interdependence. What if farmers and consumers were committed to treat each other fairly? In other words, what if the relationships mattered, and what if you saw yourself as a cooperative, interdependent unit? And as you're probably aware, there is an institution called Community-Supported Agriculture, CSAs, which are all over the country. There's tens of thousands, maybe more. In these communities, there's one right near me, the farmer asks the local people what they want. And the local people say, I'd like to get zucchini. That's crazy, nobody wants zucchini, but let's just take zucchini as an example. Okay, how many can you use? 10 bushels of zucchini. Okay, that's what we plant. And so you don't have any of this anxiety about, oh my God, what if nobody buys my products? I'll go broke. And it's interdependent, and that has led in some places even to a barter economy where you come into the CSA and you work for part of your food. And that's going on all over the country, and you don't know about it because it has to stay under the tax radar. So a lot of these communities are not really quite legalized yet, not to mention the people working on them. And one of the models that they use, they went about this in a very intelligent way. They didn't just spring up from the soil. They went around studying things like the Rochdale community, which was probably the oldest co-op in the country, maybe the oldest in the industrialized world. They looked at an area in the Basque region of France where they started, we're running out of space here, an area called Mondragon, where they tried to reconstruct capitalism. They wanted to build capitalism with a human face. It was all started by a Catholic priest. His name is Father Arizmendi, and he started it not around kitchen tables, but in bars in the Basque country. You go in and talk to these farmers. Factories were failing in that region because it's a region that the Spanish are very nervous about. Something about bombs, I don't quite follow this. But they were letting the region run down and said, what if we take it back and we build our own factories? And they were not against capitalism. This is the interesting thing. Everybody who works in one of these plants owns part of the plant. Well, what if you come in and you don't have any capital? Okay, a certain part of your salary is tithed to giving you ownership in the plant. So after you've worked there for 10 years, you have a reasonable share. It's not that you don't have managers, but managers can only earn 10 times more than a beginning line worker. 10 times more may sound like a lot, but bear in mind, if you're working for Disney as a file clerk, the CEO of Disney, who I understand is the wealthiest, highest paid CEO in the world, he's getting hundreds of thousands of times more money than you're getting. I once figured out that the chancellor was getting 5 times more than I was, and I didn't like that at all because I didn't think I was only as good as a fifth of the chancellor, but what are you going to do? So they do have capitalism in the sense that they manufacture products with using capital and building infrastructure, but they don't let it run out of hand, and it's been a very successful experiment. So they studied that. And what they have tried to develop is what they call a stakeholder model instead of an investor-owned model. In other words, you don't own the factory because you have the money to invest in it, and therefore you get to say everything, who manufactures what, how much money it's sold for, and so forth. Instead, everybody who has a stake in this, who's involved in it in one way or another, whether you're the end consumer, or you're a worker, or a farmer, or you're an investor, you get to form a cooperative and decide what to do with this whole operation. And let me underline some of the language here, and then apologize for having not let you say even one single peep the whole time. We'll make up for that. The power of cooperative business alternative is that it can nurture what is best in people. That's an incredible concept which you will see very often advertised, but falsely. Nurture what is best in people and enable us to meet our needs in ways in which everyone wins. Now, in those simple words, there's a lot of nonviolent ideology packed into them because you're talking about needs. When you're talking about needs, you're not talking about wants. So you're smack on target. Oh, sorry. You are very much lined up with Gandhian economics. And you have a concept in which everyone wins. So you're not using the competitive instinct to drive success. One last phrase. In such a world, there would be no place for the violence that's inherent in competitive, greed-fueled, buyer beware economics. So to sum it up, and they have a list of their values and stuff here. Would be very interested if you're writing. You might find this very interesting if you're writing on that in any way. But to sum it up, I would say that we have a network of very, very promising constructive program alternatives that are going on out there. I've said this before. I'll say it again. What we don't have is somebody looking at the whole picture and saying we should be doing constructive program here and obstructive program here, and now we need CP. Now we need OP. We don't have that strategic overview. But I think it's starting to build. It's starting to come. People are beginning to realize this. Okay, I can't believe 24 hours ago I was stricken with anxiety that I would have nothing to say today, and this Logoria is the result of all that. So good to see you people again, and I'll see you on Thursday. Hi there.
I have a question about my